did not go to my grandfather's funeral, not because I was honoring his last request, but because I had spent my whole life being removed from things that were supposed to be mine. In our family, names mattered more than people, and I had learned early that my name was only useful as a warning. I was the wrong kind of child to him, not in a dramatic way, just in the cold, practical way he measured everything, the way a man measures livestock and land. When he was dying, his breath thin and papery, he still turned his head to look at me, and there was no softness in it. He did not ask for forgiveness, he did not offer any, he simply gave an order that landed like a stamp on a form. He said I was never to go near his grave, never to touch the soil where he was put, never to stand over him and pretend I belonged there. The room was full of relatives who suddenly found the ceiling interesting, and my mother acted like it was normal for a dying man to reach for control instead of comfort. People like to say that last words are sacred, but in my family they were more like rope. They were something you could hang someone with, and nobody had to tie a knot because everyone understood what was expected. My mother told me to let it go, that he was dead and it did not matter, and my father stayed quiet the way he always stayed quiet in front of his brothers. I watched grown adults rehearse grief like a performance they had done before, and I felt something in me go numb, like touching cold metal in winter and realizing it is colder than your skin can handle. I stayed away for 3 days, and on the third night I woke up because I felt a tension at the foot of my bed. There was no sound of breathing, no weight on the floor, no door shifting in its frame, only the unmistakable pressure of being watched at close range. The bedroom looked ordinary in the dark, but the shadow behind my closet door looked heavier than it should have, as if the hallway light was being pulled into it. When I turned on my lamp there was nothing there, but the mirror on my dresser fogged over in one narrow area, right between my eyebrows, like someone had breathed onto the glass from the inside. I told myself it was grief or exhaustion, or the strange hours of sleeping in my childhood room again. I told myself my mind was inventing patterns because the house was full of old rules and old silence. I lay back down, and the sense of being observed did not leave, it only moved closer, as if whatever it was had learned that I could feel it. I drifted in and out of sleep with the same thought repeating, that my grandfather's order was not about him, it was about me. In the morning my grandmother spoke to me in a voice that was too short, too clipped, unlike her usual endless commentary on everyone else's failures. She told me not to go behind the house, not to open the wooden chest where the funeral items were kept, and not to ask about a brown cloth bag that had been delivered while I was still asleep. She said these things the way someone reads out the safety instructions on a plane, calm, fast, and without room for questions. When I looked toward the living room, I saw the bag tucked under the family altar shelf, plain cloth tied shut with a fresh red string, bright enough to look intentional in that dusty house. I did not open it, but I heard it all day. It was not loud, not the sound of an animal moving, just a soft shifting like fabric settling, timed strangely to my own body, as if the bag knew my heart rate and chose to keep pace. I tried to ignore it, and every time I passed it I felt my eyes pull toward it, as if looking away took effort. My grandmother watched me without speaking, and for the first time I noticed how careful she was with her own gaze, how she never looked directly at certain corners of the house. I stayed because of her, or because I wanted to know if my grandfather's rule held any power when his mouth was full of dirt. Late that night I took a lighter and a couple of sticks of incense from the altar shelf, not because I believed in it, but because it was what people did when they wanted to feel protected. The road to the cemetery was narrow and unlit, lined with scrub grass that whispered in the wind like private conversations. The air did not feel cold in the way weather feels cold, it felt cold in the way a room feels cold after someone has been waiting there a long time. His grave was still new, a mound of dark soil with a bright headstone, the letters sharp and clean. I lit the incense, and when the flame caught I saw a thin scratch on the edge of the stone, as if someone had dragged a fingernail across it and stopped halfway. I brushed at the dust, and the moment my palm touched the stone a numbness shot through my hand, up my wrist and into my arm like a signal being sent through my nerves. There was no pain and no blood, but the sensation clung to me the way smoke clings to hair, and I could not shake it off. When I stepped back, the ground under my shoes trembled, so lightly I would have blamed my own balance if I had not been holding my breath. The grave did not collapse, nothing dramatic happened, there was no hand reaching up, no sound, no cracking stone. Instead a hairline split appeared along the edge of the mound, a neat line that ran away from the grave toward the older family plots, as if someone had drawn it with a pencil to show where the boundary really was. It looked less like a natural shift and more like a mark, a reminder that there was an order here that I had just disturbed. I walked home slowly, and by the time I reached the porch the sky was starting to pale. My grandmother was sitting at the kitchen table as if she had not moved all night, a cup of hot water in front of her, steam still rising. She did not ask where I had been, she looked at me with the steady expression of someone who already knew the answer and was waiting to see if I would lie. The brown bag was gone, and in its place, centered under the altar shelf like a bill, was a thin envelope with neat black writing on the front. The words were simple, written in a careful hand that made my skin crawl because it looked practiced. It said that a name could be crossed out, but payment still came due. I opened the envelope where I stood because once something starts paying attention to you, it does not wait until you feel ready. Inside was a photocopy of an old family record page, stamped in red, and on the last line my name had been written in and then crossed out with one hard stroke, as if whoever did it wanted the paper to remember the pressure. Beside the crossed-out name in different handwriting there was a short note. It said that crossing out one could save the whole house. My grandmother stood behind me and told me, in a voice that finally sounded scared, that I should not ask questions because questions were doors. As she said it, I turned the page over, and on the back I saw a faint circular smudge like ash pressed by a palm, and in the center of that circle, a thin vertical line, like the suggestion of a seam where a face would split open. Before I could say anything, a small sound came from the kitchen, a knife slipping off the counter and tapping the tile. It was not a crash, it was too gentle for that, like someone had placed it there and let it fall on purpose. I bent to pick it up, and in the polished metal I saw not my own face, but a shape standing behind my shoulder, exactly as close as the presence had felt at the end of my bed. When I stood up and looked, the kitchen was empty, and my grandmother's hands were trembling around her mug. From that morning on, the house became quiet in a way that did not match human behavior. It was not that nobody talked, it was that sound seemed to stop at the edges of rooms, as if the air itself had become thick. My grandmother cleaned the altar shelf and placed a full bowl of water under it, not as an offering, but as if she were placing a tool where someone else could use it. My mother called from the city and told me to come back, her voice trying to sound normal, and I could hear something thin underneath it like a panic she was swallowing. I did not leave immediately because I had begun to understand that if I ran without knowing what was happening, I would carry it with me. That night I woke up at the same hour, and the attention in the room felt sharper, closer, almost clinical. It felt like someone reading me, my habits and my breathing and the way I shifted my weight, like I was a file they had been building for years. When I turned on the light the room was empty, but the mirror fogged again between my eyebrows, and on the fog there was a faint straight mark as if a nail had traced a line. The next day at the local grocery store, the cashier looked at my face longer than people usually do, then quickly looked away as if she had made a mistake. On my walk home, I passed a little boy crouched in the dirt outside a neighbor's fence, drawing a circle and a straight line down the middle with a stick. I asked what he was making and he did not answer, he only stared at me and then ran, leaving the mark behind. The strange part was that the mark did not blow away, even when the wind picked up, as if it was not chalk or dust at all, but something heavier. In the afternoon I went into the shed behind the house looking for rope, and I found a wooden chest I had never been allowed to open. The lock was rusted, but the lid looked freshly touched, and the smell inside was not mold, it was old paper and burned incense, a scent that made me think of forgotten promises. There were thin notebooks stacked inside, each labeled with names and years, each stamped in red. In the center was the thickest one, unlabeled except for one word burned into the cover, a word that meant root. The first pages were lists of children born into the family with columns for gender, for whether they were recorded, for whether they were crossed out, and another column that simply said credit. I did not understand until I read the small notes written at the bottom in tidy handwriting, like minutes from a meeting. It explained that each time a daughter was crossed out, the household received credit, a year without accidents, a crop that did not fail, an illness that lifted, a disaster that missed them by inches. The calmness of the record sickened me more than any ghost story, because it meant someone had turned blood into interest and called it tradition. I stood there too long, and then I heard my grandmother's slippers stop at the shed door. She did not step inside, she only told me to close it because those books were not for a granddaughter to read. I asked her how long she had known, and she did not answer, and that silence was longer than any confession. I flipped to the back of the ledger and found the year my grandfather's health began to fail, and beside it my name circled, not crossed out yet, but in the credit column there was already a red dot, placed in advance like a reservation. That night I dreamed of the old family meeting hall where I had never been allowed to sit. In the dream, men without clear faces sat in rows, their eyes visible and fixed on a book like they were looking down into a well. On the table between them was a bowl of black water, and every time someone spoke a girl's name the surface trembled, and a vertical split appeared in the center, opening like an eyelid. I woke with my throat burning dry, and there was a red string tied in a tight knot around my bedroom doorknob, as if someone had left a reminder right beside my face. I ran into the living room and found my grandmother sitting upright in a chair, holding a pair of old scissors the way a retired soldier holds a weapon. She told me slowly that when she was young she watched a neighboring family lose 3 sons in a row, and then suddenly everything went quiet and normal again after one daughter's name disappeared from the record. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone understood, and understanding became law. She said my grandfather had not invented the ledger, he had only believed in it harder than anyone else, because it gave him permission to call cruelty necessity. She told me there were people in the county who called themselves keepers, not in a dramatic cult way, but in the way someone calls themselves an accountant or an auditor. They helped families stay stable, and stability was traded for silence and for crossed-out names, and once you accepted stability you paid it back slowly. She said the worst part was that the payment did not always feel like payment at first, it felt like luck, and people loved luck more than they loved their own daughters. When I asked where the root of it was, she did not answer directly. She only pressed the scissors into my hands and told me that if I heard my name being called from outside at night, I had to cut the red string on the back door handle, no matter what voice I heard, no matter what it sounded like. Near midnight there was a polite tapping at the back door, not frantic, not violent, the kind of knock a neighbor gives when they think you might still be awake. I stood still, and my heart slowed down strangely, as if my body had been tuned to match someone else's rhythm. The knock stopped, and then the sound of paper moving drifted through the house, a soft shuffle, like a book turning its own pages. I turned toward the altar shelf and saw the root ledger open, though I remembered putting it back in the chest, and it was open to my name, the crossed-out column blank, and a new line written in the margin. It said that if I was not crossed out, someone would be substituted. Before I could fully understand what substituted meant, the bowl of water under the altar trembled, and in its surface I saw a reflection that did not belong to our house. I saw a tall iron gate, cameras mounted on stone pillars like fish eyes, angled downward as if measuring whoever walked through. The image lasted only a moment, and then the water went still again, but the impression stayed in my stomach like swallowed cold. The next morning I left for the city because I realized the keepers were not just part of the cemetery soil, they were part of the way everyone avoided each other's eyes. My grandmother insisted on coming with me, carrying the brown cloth bag I thought had disappeared, and inside it something hard shifted with a ceramic clink. On the highway I checked the rearview mirror too often, and each time the back seat looked darker than it should have, as if the car carried extra shadow. My grandmother told me not to watch the mirror because some things learned routes by being noticed. When we reached my apartment, she moved through it in a way that made it feel like she had rehearsed for this all her life. She did not hang charms or paste symbols on the walls, she rearranged furniture, rotated chairs, and pulled curtains so the angles of the rooms changed. She placed a shallow bowl of salt at the threshold, not with ceremony, but with the calm focus of someone setting a trap. Most importantly, she removed the clear mirror in my bedroom and replaced it with a piece of frosted glass, and she told me that mirrors were neutral, but they made it easier for attention to find you because people revealed themselves when they tried to see themselves. That first night I woke up to the sound of dripping from the kitchen sink, steady and patient like a second clock. When I walked into the kitchen, the faucet was tightly shut and the floor was dry, but the dripping continued as if it came from inside the wall. I pressed my ear to the drywall and the sound changed. It was no longer water, it was a gentle scraping, consistent and calm, like fingernails testing a thin surface. I stepped back and the overhead light flickered once, not a burst, just a single blink, and then held steady again. In the morning my mother called and told me that people in the family wanted me back that weekend for a ceremony, a proper correction, she said, a way to record my name again the right way. Her voice sounded like she was reading a text message someone had told her to read, and underneath it I heard the fatigue of someone who had spent years living to avoid making the wider family uncomfortable. When I asked her if she knew about the root ledger, she went quiet for too long, then told me there were things you should not open because opening them meant you could never shut them again. The call ended abruptly and I pictured someone standing near her, listening. That afternoon an envelope slid under my apartment door, no knock, no footsteps, as if it had been waiting on the other side of the hallway. It had the same ash circle mark on it, with the vertical line pressed into the center. Inside was a printed note, cold and professional, telling me to come Saturday at the exact time, and to bring the one who held the scissors. I looked at my grandmother, and for the first time I saw real fear on her face, not fear of ghosts, but fear of being reduced to a function, a role assigned long before she agreed to it. That night I slept in fragments, and I dreamed of a room lit with dim red light, not bright, but thick, like light filtered through skin. I was bound to a chair, not in pain, just numb, as if the rope tightened around thought instead of flesh. In front of me a leather notebook lay open with hand-drawn diagrams, arrows moving from a head marked with a vertical seam to another head, and words written like a report: stability, failure rate, transfer. I woke sweating, and in the living room on the coffee table, sat a small leather notebook I had never seen before, as if my dream had left something behind. My grandmother refused to touch it with her hands. She used the scissors to lift the cover like she was afraid contact would count as acceptance. When I opened it, it did not mention my family's name at all. It listed other families, other towns, other dates, and the same circle and seam symbol repeated like a logo. Beside, several entries were notes: settled, credited, adjusted, and one page made my throat tighten because it had our family labeled like inventory. It said there was one remaining debt, as if someone had been keeping track of our household like a line item. I asked my grandmother why this notebook was here, and she said it had not arrived, it had been returned. She said my grandfather may have signed something before he died, and a dying man's signature carried a strange weight, because it sat between fear and hunger. I remembered the way he insisted I stay away from his grave, and I started to suspect he was not trying to punish me, he was trying to prevent the debt from noticing me. If that was true, it meant he knew what he had done and he had still done it anyway. By Friday night the wrongness thickened like fog. I walked past the frosted glass in my bedroom, and for a moment I did not see my own blurred reflection. I saw a long hallway sloping downward, lit with cold lights, like the throat of a large building. When I turned around, the hallway was gone, but the sensation of incline remained in my gut, like my body had remembered the edge of stairs. My grandmother told me not to look anymore, and when she said it I heard something like a soft laugh in the other room, not joyful and not cruel, just patient, the sound of something that believed it would win by waiting. At midnight my phone rang and the screen showed an unfamiliar number, but the caller name displayed a single word: root. I did not answer, and it rang again, then stopped, as if whoever called did not need me to speak, only needed me to know I had been reached. Saturday morning my grandmother dressed in her most formal outfit, not funeral black, not church clothes, but the kind of outfit she wore when she went to meetings and refused to be talked down to. She wrapped the scissors in cloth and tied them with red string, like she was trying to lock the tool away until it was forced into use. We drove back to the old town, and the family meeting hall sat at the end of a narrow road behind a tall iron gate. Cameras were mounted on the gate pillars, angled downward, their glass dark and round like eyes that did not blink. When I walked through, something inside my head clicked, not painful, just clear, like a lock releasing. The yard was full of relatives laughing and carrying folding chairs and greeting each other like it was any ordinary gathering, and the normality felt staged, like a set where everyone knew their marks. Inside the hall, a long table held a large red-bound registry book and a bowl of clear water set in the center. The strange thing was that the water did not reflect the overhead light, as if reflection had been taken from it. The family head read names in a steady voice like an inventory, and after each name he pressed a red stamp down with a soft sound that still felt heavy, like stamping into bone. I stood behind my grandmother and felt the weight of the wrapped scissors in her hands, not because the metal was heavy, but because of what it represented. When my turn came, the family head slowed down, not with compassion but with the careful pace of procedure. He looked at the page where my name was written and crossed out, and beside it a new column had been added, a column labeled substitute in fresh black ink. He said this was a correction, a way to record things properly so there would be no confusion later. As he spoke, the bowl of water trembled, not from wind, but from the gathering attention in the room, as if something unseen leaned closer. I kept my eyes off the water, but I felt heat building between my eyebrows, as if a red thread was being pulled tight from the inside. The noise from the yard faded, and what remained was breathing and the sound of pen on paper. I saw a distant cousin holding up a phone, recording the table like this was a moment worth preserving, and his hand shook slightly. In that second, what horrified me most was not the supernatural suggestion, it was that they had done this enough times for someone to want proof. The family head offered my grandmother a pen and referred to her by the same phrase from the printed note, the one who held the scissors. He said she needed to sign the substitute column, as if she were confirming delivery. My grandmother asked quietly who was being substituted, and the family head answered that it would be the one already marked. We both understood that meant me, and the understanding landed heavier than any curse, because it was spoken as administration. My grandmother placed the wrapped scissors on the table without untying the string, like she was laying down evidence. She said she had tolerated a lifetime of disrespect and cruelty, but she would not sign a paper that handed her granddaughter over to a system built on cowardice. The family head began to speak about tradition and duty, and then stopped mid-sentence because the bowl of water shuddered harder, and in its center a thin vertical split appeared on the surface, opening like an eyelid. Nobody screamed, nobody ran. People leaned in and watched and then looked at me, and their eyes were no longer avoiding, they were measuring. I touched my forehead and my skin felt normal, but underneath it there was a faint tingling, like something arranging itself. The red registry book rustled, and a page turned on its own, stopping on my name, then turning again to my grandfather's entry, where a small mark indicated partial payment had been made. Under it, in ink that looked too fresh, a new line appeared that said if no signature was given, the whole household would be collected. The family head pushed the pen toward my grandmother again, his voice no longer steady. My grandmother's shoulders tightened, and I saw the moment of hesitation in her eyes, not because she wanted to comply, but because she understood the kind of threat that does not need fists. Then the hall door opened, and a man in a dark coat stepped inside with the calm posture of someone arriving for work. He introduced himself not as a threat, but as a supervisor, someone who audited accounts, and when he looked at me I felt, with sick certainty, that the cameras outside had adjusted their focus. He said debt was not a matter of emotion, it was paperwork, and paperwork did not care who suffered. He placed a leather notebook on the table, matching the one that had appeared in my apartment, and opened it to the diagrams of transfer like a doctor opening a chart. He said our household had accepted credit for too long, and now the principal was due. He spoke the word principal the way someone might say root, like it was a natural law. When he leaned forward to press his stamp, the clear water in the bowl darkened, as if ink had been poured into it without a hand. In the surface I saw the red-lit room from my dream, the rope, the chair, and a figure seated with their back turned. The figure's forehead held a thin vertical glow, like a seam catching light. I could not breathe properly, not because I was panicking, but because my body was recognizing a place it had never been, the way you recognize a smell from childhood and feel trapped inside it. I stopped thinking about running because the structure around this had existed too long to be outrun. The supervisor said they were not there to kill me, not in any immediate dramatic sense, they were there to formalize me, to make sure the mark belonged to the correct person in the correct ledger. He spoke like a man who believed he was providing stability to communities, and that belief made him more frightening than greed, because it gave him the comfort of righteousness. Around us, relatives stood silent, their faces carefully blank, and in that silence I heard the collective calculation, that if it was not me, it would be someone else, and they preferred someone else. My grandmother offered herself, suddenly and sharply, insisting she would sign for her own substitution if they would remove my name. The supervisor looked at her the way a mathematician looks at an incorrect number, then said substitution was not random. He said the substitute had to be the one who held the scissors, the one who had touched the threshold string, the one who had been instructed in the mechanics of the cut, the one who knew too much to return to being ordinary. In other words, my grandmother had been named the moment she lifted the scissors that first night, and I had been named the moment my palm touched the headstone. I wanted to shout, but my throat tightened as if something inside me preferred quiet, as if silence was safer. I began to understand that the supernatural part of this was not flashing lights or shrieking ghosts, it was pressure. It was a force that trained people to self-censor, to step back, to choose the path that hurt the least in the short term, even if it ruined someone else. The supervisor said they disliked violence because violence created witnesses, and what they required was consent, not the loud kind, the quiet kind that people gave by standing still. He explained that the adjustment happened the same way every time. It was not a monster dragging someone away, it was a perfectly timed accident, a fall on the right step, a sudden despair at an open window, a decision that felt like your own until you realized it had been guided. When he said it, I remembered a night in my apartment before my grandmother arrived, when I had stood at my window with my hand on the latch, unsure why I felt drawn to open it. I had blamed stress, but now I understood how easy it was to nudge a mind when it was already exhausted. I found myself stepping toward the bowl of water without deciding to. When I looked into it, I heard the drip in my kitchen, the knife tapping tile, the pages shuffling, and all those sounds aligned into a single rhythm, like a metronome. In that rhythm I saw my grandfather, not as a dying man, but as a shadow beside a riverbank, stamp in hand, pressing names into silence. He did not hate me like a person hates, he hated me like a tool hates an obstacle, because my existence threatened the story he had built to justify himself. My grandmother unwrapped the scissors, and the metal made a small sound against the air, like a quiet decision. She placed them on the open registry book near the substitute column, and she asked one question before she did anything else. She asked why our family had been chosen, why the debt lasted generations, and who signed first, because she was old and no longer afraid of being called crazy. The supervisor turned the leather notebook to its earliest page and showed a list of initial agreements. The first name was not my grandfather's. It was a woman's name from almost a century earlier, marked with a note that simply said cut, and beside it was the same ash circle and seam symbol. My grandmother made a small sound, and I saw her face change as she recognized a name she had almost never spoken, a relative on her own side of the family, someone she described only as having died without peace. The debt had not begun with my grandfather's obsession, it had begun with one desperate trade and then another, until trade became habit, and habit became tradition, and tradition became a machine that swallowed daughters and called it stability. The supervisor said guilt did not choose sides, it chose where it could live comfortably, and the most comfortable place was where people were willing to stay quiet. As he said that, the daylight outside dimmed slightly, like cloud cover moving across the sun, and one of the cameras at the gate turned with a small mechanical adjustment, aimed directly at the hall entrance. I heard a tiny click in my head, a second lock releasing, and heat flared between my eyebrows, not pain but a burning awareness. When I touched my forehead, I felt a faint raised line under the skin, thin as thread, like a seam that had always been there and was only now becoming real. The bowl of water went still again, and the vertical split on its surface closed like an eyelid finishing a slow blink. The supervisor said the formalization was complete, and no signature was necessary, because the mechanism had recognized me. He said that from now on I would notice who carried debt, I would sense it the way you sense dampness in a closed room, and if I wanted my family to remain stable, I would know what to do without anyone needing to instruct me. He said their role was no longer to interfere, only to observe, and he spoke that last word softly, like it was both promise and threat. We left the hall without anyone stopping us, and the relatives returned to their quiet tasks, their faces relieved in the way people look when the danger has been redirected. My grandmother walked beside me, her shoulders lower than usual, as if she had finally accepted the real weight of the route. On the drive back to the city I watched my reflection in the passenger window when streetlights passed, and under the right angle I could see the faint vertical line between my eyebrows, so subtle it could be denied, but present enough to feel like a signature on my skin. That night in my apartment, my grandmother slept on the couch with the scissors on the table like evidence nobody could throw away. I sat alone and listened to the building, the refrigerator hum, distant traffic, the occasional footstep in the hallway, and beneath those normal sounds there was a thicker silence, the kind of silence that felt occupied. I went into the bathroom and faced the frosted glass, and instead of trying to see myself clearly, I let my eyes rest because I understood that clarity did not equal safety. In the blur, a faint shape appeared behind my shoulder for a moment, not my grandfather, not anyone I could name, just the suggestion of a person with the same vertical seam where a forehead should be smooth. When I turned around, the bathroom was empty. The attention did not vanish, it simply relocated, no longer at the end of a bed or behind a closet door, but inside my own head, as if the keepers no longer needed to stand outside the threshold because they had placed the guard inside me. I washed my hands until my skin reddened and the water stayed cold, but my palms felt hot anyway because some things do not live on the surface. When I turned off the light, the apartment went dark, and in that dark I could swear I heard paper shifting softly, like a ledger turning to a fresh page, patient enough to wait for the next name.